France just accepted Greece's request for a formal mutual defense agreement, and this is absolutely unprecedented. We're not talking about vague promises or diplomatic statements. This is a binding military alliance where France commits to defend Greece with French military forces if Greece is attacked. Turkey is calling this a hostile act that fundamentally threatens regional stability. NATO is in crisis mode because two alliance members just created a separate defense pact aimed at another NATO member. What happens next could literally split the Western alliance and reshape European security in ways we haven't seen since the Cold War ended. Before we dive into this explosive development and what it means for global security, smash that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. The implications of this defense pact are unfolding by the hour, and you need to understand exactly what France and Greece have agreed to and why it has Washington absolutely panicking. Let me break down the exact terms of this agreement because the details are stunning. France and Greece have signed a mutual defense clause that commits both countries to provide military assistance if either is attacked. This isn't NATO Article 5, which requires consensus from all members. This is a bilateral agreement that activates automatically if certain conditions are met. If Turkish forces attack Greek territory or Greek military assets, France is obligated to respond with French military power. The agreement includes specific provisions about what constitutes an attack. It covers not just invasion of Greek mainland territory, but also attacks on Greek islands, Greek naval vessels in Greek territorial waters, and Greek aircraft in Greek airspace. It even extends to what Greece considers its exclusive economic zone in disputed maritime areas. This is deliberately broad, designed to cover the exact scenarios where Greek-Turkish tensions are highest. France commits to deploying French military forces to Greek bases during crises. The agreement establishes French permanent military presence on Greek soil, including French liaison officers, intelligence personnel, and potentially pre-positioned equipment. French Air Force fighters will conduct regular deployments to Greek bases. French Navy vessels will operate from Greek ports. This isn't hypothetical future cooperation. This is actual French military presence in Greece starting immediately. The agreement also includes intelligence sharing provisions. France will provide Greece with satellite imagery, signals intelligence, and analysis of Turkish military activities. French intelligence capabilities are substantial, including sophisticated spy satellites and global electronic surveillance systems. Greece gains access to information it couldn't collect independently, dramatically improving Greek situational awareness. Joint military exercises between French and Greek forces will occur quarterly. These are not symbolic displays, but realistic combat training designed to ensure French and Greek forces can operate together effectively in actual war. The exercises will practice scenarios including air defense, naval operations, amphibious warfare, and combined arms operations. They're rehearsing how to fight together against an opponent that both countries clearly understand is Turkey, even if not stated explicitly. Now let's talk about why France agreed to this extraordinary commitment. France is making a calculated bet that challenging Turkey directly serves French strategic interests more than maintaining the fiction of NATO unity. President Macron has concluded that Turkey under Erdogan is not a reliable ally, and that Turkey's regional ambitions threaten French interests in the Mediterranean, North Africa, and the Middle East. France and Turkey have clashed repeatedly over Libya, where they backed opposite sides in the civil war. They've confronted each other over Eastern Mediterranean energy exploration, where French companies partnered with Greece, Cyprus, and Egypt, while Turkey aggressively asserted competing claims. They've traded accusations over Syria, migration policy, and treatment of religious minorities. The relationship has deteriorated to the point where Macron apparently believes formal alliance against Turkey is preferable to pretending partnership still exists. France sees an opportunity to position itself as the leading European power in the Mediterranean by creating a coalition of countries willing to challenge Turkey. Greece is the anchor, but Cyprus is closely aligned. Egypt has deepened military cooperation with France, and potentially others could join. If France can create this network with itself at the center, France becomes the indispensable security provider for the entire Eastern Mediterranean region. This serves French economic interests. French defense companies gain massive contracts selling weapons to Greece and potentially other countries in this coalition. French energy companies can explore Mediterranean resources with French military backing. French ports and bases gain strategic importance as hubs for Mediterranean operations. French influence expands into a resource-rich region where France historically had colonies but lost influence in recent decades. President Macron also has domestic political calculations. Taking a strong stance against Turkey plays well with French voters concerned about Turkish President Erdogan's authoritarian turn and hostile rhetoric toward France. Macron can portray himself as defending French interests and standing up to threats. French military action, even if limited to deployments rather than combat, allows Macron to demonstrate French power and relevance. From Greece's perspective, this agreement is transformative and represents exactly what Greece has sought for years. Greece has felt vulnerable facing Turkey's larger military, while NATO allies offered only diplomatic statements and urged restraint. Greece wanted a powerful ally willing to actually fight alongside Greece if Turkey attacks. France has now provided exactly that commitment. Greek officials are portraying this as validation that Greece's position on maritime disputes, territorial integrity, and regional security is supported by a major European power. Greece can now tell Turkey that attacks on Greece mean war with France, not just Greece. This should theoretically deter Turkish aggression by raising the costs and risks beyond what Turkey is willing to accept. The agreement also reduces Greek fear of abandonment. Greece has worried that in an actual crisis, NATO might prioritize maintaining alliance unity over defending Greece, effectively pressuring Greece to accept Turkish demands to avoid intra-NATO conflict. With French commitment, Greece knows that at least one powerful ally will definitely respond, regardless of what NATO collectively decides. For the Greek public, this agreement is enormously popular. Greeks have historical ties to France dating back to Greek independence struggles that France supported. French culture is admired in Greece. French military prowess is respected. Having France as a formal ally reassures Greek citizens that their country can defend itself and isn't isolated facing Turkish threats. Turkey's reaction has been explosive and immediate. Turkish officials issued statements calling the France-Greece Defense Pact a hostile alliance aimed at Turkey that violates the spirit of NATO and threatens regional peace. Turkey's foreign ministry summoned the French ambassador for a harsh dressing down. Turkish President Erdogan gave a speech describing this as a new crusader alliance against the Muslim world, using inflammatory religious language designed to rally domestic support. Turkey argues this agreement undermines NATO by creating competing security arrangements within the alliance. Turkey points out that NATO is supposed to provide collective defense that makes bilateral pacts unnecessary. Turkey claims France and Greece are preparing for aggression against Turkey and using mutual defense as cover for offensive plans. Behind the angry rhetoric, Turkish officials are genuinely concerned about strategic implications. Turkey has relied on NATO divisions to limit consequences of Turkish actions. When Turkey behaves aggressively, different NATO members respond differently, and Turkish officials exploit those divisions. A unified France-Greece front backed by formal treaty eliminates ambiguity and presents Turkey with credible opposition that can't be easily divided. Turkey is also worried about precedent. If France can create bilateral defense pacts within NATO aimed at other members, what prevents other countries from doing the same? Could Poland and Baltic states create formal alliances against Russia independent of NATO? Could this fragment NATO into competing blocs rather than a unified alliance? Turkish military planners now have to account for French intervention in any conflict with Greece. French military capabilities are substantial. France has a carrier strike group, nuclear-powered submarines, advanced fighter aircraft, and precision strike capabilities. French forces are professional, well-trained, and experienced from recent operations in Africa and the Middle East. Adding French military power to Greek defenses fundamentally changes Turkish operational planning. Turkey may respond by seeking its own alternative security arrangements. Turkey has already been developing closer military ties with Russia, Pakistan, and Azerbaijan. Turkey could formalize these relationships into mutual defense agreements, creating rival alliance structures. Turkey might also threaten to withdraw from NATO entirely, though that would be an extreme step with enormous consequences Turkey probably wants to avoid. NATO finds itself in an unprecedented crisis. The alliance was founded on the principle that an attack on one member is an attack on all. Now 2 members have created a separate mutual defense arrangement, implicitly aimed at a third member. NATO Secretary General issued statements calling for dialogue and reaffirming that NATO is the primary framework for European security. But these statements sound hollow when member states are creating competing alliances. American officials are deeply frustrated with this situation. The United States needs both France and Greece for various strategic purposes, and the United States absolutely needs Turkey despite all the problems in that relationship. American bases in Turkey are crucial for Middle East operations. Turkey controls the straits connecting the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. Turkey has NATO's second-largest military. Losing Turkey would be a disaster for American strategy. But the United States also can't simply abandon Greece and France. Greece is a EU and NATO member whose sovereignty the United States is committed to defending. France is America's oldest ally and remains a critical partner despite frequent disagreements. Trying to pressure France and Greece to abandon their agreement would poison those relationships without any guarantee of success. American officials are trying to mediate between all parties while preserving NATO unity. The United States is urging Turkey to moderate its behavior and take Greek concerns seriously. Simultaneously, the United States is telling Greece and France that provocative actions risk creating crises America doesn't want to manage. American diplomats are proposing dialogue frameworks and confidence-building measures, but there's little evidence any party is particularly interested in American mediation. Congress is divided along predictable lines. Some lawmakers support France and Greece, viewing Turkey as an unreliable partner that deserves pushback. Others warn that fragmenting NATO serves Russian and Chinese interests by dividing the West. There's no consensus on American policy, which limits the administration's ability to take decisive positions. Germany and other EU countries are caught between competing interests. European solidarity suggests supporting Greece and France as EU members, but many Europeans are uncomfortable with the confrontational approach toward Turkey and worry about consequences. Germany particularly has massive economic ties with Turkey, millions of people of Turkish descent living in Germany, and strong preferences for diplomatic engagement over military confrontation. The European Union issued carefully worded statements expressing understanding for Greece as security concerns while calling for de-escalation and dialogue. This satisfies nobody but reflects genuine EU division about how to handle the situation. Some EU members want stronger backing for the France-Greece position. Others think France is being reckless and pushing Europe toward unnecessary conflict with an important neighbor. Russia is watching with barely concealed delight. NATO divisions serve Russian strategic interests perfectly. The more NATO members fight amongst themselves, the less capable NATO is of responding to Russian actions. Russia has been trying to peel Turkey away from NATO for years. This France-Greece pact gives Turkey more reason to question NATO membership and consider alternatives. Russian officials are offering to mediate, positioning Russia as a neutral party that could facilitate dialogue. This is obviously self-serving, but Turkey might actually engage with Russian mediation as a way to demonstrate independence from the West. Russia would love nothing more than to be the broker of security arrangements in the Mediterranean, replacing American and NATO leadership. China is also benefiting from NATO disarray. Anything that divides and distracts Western countries helps China by reducing Western focus on Indo-Pacific competition. Chinese officials publicly call for peaceful resolution, while privately being pleased that European and American attention is pulled toward Mediterranean crises, rather than concentrated on containing China. Let's discuss what this means militarily in practical terms. French forces will now operate regularly from Greek bases. French fighter jets will be stationed on Greek soil, ready to respond to threats within minutes rather than hours. French naval vessels will patrol waters around Greek islands, providing both surveillance and immediate response capability. French intelligence assets will monitor Turkish military activities continuously. If a crisis erupts, French and Greek forces can respond as an integrated team rather than independent militaries trying to coordinate after the fact. They'll use the same communication systems, same operational procedures, same tactical doctrines. This dramatically increases effectiveness compared to ad hoc cooperation during emergencies. The presence of French forces also creates tripwire effects. If Turkish forces attack Greek positions where French personnel are present, French casualties become likely. French casualties trigger automatic French public and political pressure for major retaliation. Turkey can't simply conduct limited strikes against Greek targets without risking much broader conflict with France. This changes deterrence dynamics fundamentally. Previously, Turkey could calibrate aggression against Greece, using limited force while calculating that Greece couldn't or wouldn't respond massively. With France formally committed, even limited Turkish actions risk triggering responses from a major military power that Turkey can't easily counter. This should theoretically make Turkey much more cautious. However, there's a darker scenario where this increases rather than decreases conflict risk. If Turkey believes the window for resolving disputes through force is closing as Greece becomes stronger through French support, Turkey might strike sooner rather than later. Turkish officials might calculate that acting now, before French forces are fully integrated and positioned, offers better prospects than waiting. There are also risks of entrapment. What if Greece takes aggressive actions, confident that France will back them, and those actions trigger Turkish responses? France could find itself obligated to fight a war that Greek actions precipitated, but that France didn't want. Alliance commitments can drag countries into conflicts they would have avoided if operating independently. The economic implications are significant. French military deployments cost money. France is committing resources to Mediterranean operations that could be used elsewhere. French taxpayers are essentially subsidizing Greek security. If France actually has to fight, the costs escalate dramatically. Wars are expensive, and France would bear enormous financial burden defending Greece. For Greece, hosting French forces and conducting joint operations requires investments in infrastructure, logistics, and coordination. Greece is upgrading bases to accommodate French personnel and equipment. Greece is investing in communication systems compatible with French forces. These expenditures are in addition to the weapons purchases we discussed previously. The defense industry is thriving on all this activity. French companies are securing contracts for weapons, equipment, and services. Greek defense contractors are benefiting from increased spending. Turkish companies are getting Turkish government contracts as Turkey responds with its own buildup. Defense stocks are rising as investors anticipate continued high spending. But resources devoted to military competition are resources not available for economic development, infrastructure, education, healthcare, or other productive uses. Both Greece and Turkey have significant domestic needs that are being shortchanged by military spending. The opportunity costs of this arms race are enormous. So what actually happens next? In the immediate term, French military personnel and equipment will begin deploying to Greece. The first French units should arrive within weeks. Media coverage will be extensive as France and Greece publicize the partnership. Turkey will respond with angry statements and probably military exercises, demonstrating Turkish capabilities. Within months, French and Greek forces will conduct their first major joint exercises under the new agreement. These will be closely watched by everyone. To assess how seriously France and Greece are taking this commitment and how effectively they can operate together. Turkey will conduct its own exercises, possibly in provocative locations or with threatening scenarios. Within a year, French presence in Greece will be normalized and substantial. French aircraft, ships, and personnel will be regular features at Greek bases. Intelligence sharing will be routine and comprehensive. Greek military planning will assume French participation. The practical integration will make the alliance increasingly difficult to reverse even if political leadership changes. Incidents testing the agreement are likely. Turkish forces might probe Greek defenses where French personnel are present to see how France responds. Turkish actions might be ambiguous enough to create questions about whether defense commitments are triggered. Greece and France will have to navigate these gray zone scenarios carefully to maintain credibility without unnecessary escalation. The longer-term outcome depends on factors that are genuinely unpredictable. Does Turkish behavior moderate in response to credible opposition, leading to eventual de-escalation? Does Turkey double down on confrontation, believing it must act decisively before the France-Greece alliance becomes too strong? Do leadership changes in any of these countries shift the political dynamics? There's also the question of whether this leads to broader alliance structures. Do Cyprus, Egypt, and potentially others formalize their security relationships with France and Greece? Does this become a real coalition with institutional frameworks and collective planning? Such development would represent fundamental restructuring of Mediterranean security architecture. What's absolutely clear is that France and Greece have taken a dramatic step that fundamentally alters regional security dynamics. This isn't rhetoric or posturing. This is a formal treaty commitment backed by actual military deployments. The Eastern Mediterranean now has competing alliance structures, with France and Greece on one side, and Turkey increasingly isolated on the other. If you've made it this far, you understand this agreement represents one of the most significant shifts in European security arrangements in decades. Two NATO members have essentially written off another NATO member as a potential threat rather than an ally. The implications are profound and concerning. Share this video with everyone who needs to understand what this defense pact really means. Most coverage treats this as just another diplomatic agreement without grasping how extraordinary and dangerous this development is. You now have the full picture. Hit that like button to help spread this analysis. Tell me in the comments what you think happens next. Does this defense pact stabilize the situation through deterrence or make war more likely? Will NATO survive this internal crisis? Should the United States support this agreement or oppose it? I want your perspective on these critical questions. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on because this situation will continue developing rapidly. As French forces deploy, as Turkey responds, as crises test the agreement, we'll break down every development. The Mediterranean security order is being rewritten before our eyes, and you need to stay informed on where this is heading. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.